everybody. Welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I have coming in from the freeish state, the Free State, as they call it, New Hampshire, Charles Hampe. He was actually one of the pioneer members of the Free State, moving there back in 2005, and I believe it started in 2004 or around that time. He also was very involved in the Liberty Dollar, and many of you are probably aware of it, but some of you might not be, and it was very interesting. It was sort of pre-Bitcoin. It was a very interesting attempt at creating a free market money that got attacked a lot by the government and still is today. So we're going to hear a lot about what happened and what is still happening with the founder of the Liberty Dollar. And Charles will actually be down here at Anarchapulco this February 24th to March 1st. The actual conference is February 27th to March 1st. We have a few workshops before then. We'll be right there on the beach in Acapulco. But before we get into all of that, Charles, I have to ask you, how did you become an anarchist?
Well, I'm happy to answer that question, and I must say that in watching the Anarchast that you've already done, I've been given a tremendous education in just hearing the answers to that question. I think that I probably have a pretty interesting story as to how I became an anarchist. For me, it was not a sudden revelation, but rather a series of hammer blows into my life that eventually convinced me that that anarchism is probably the only alternative left. It may start probably with my family. My mother and father were German. My mother lived in East Prussia during World War II. My father was a draftee in the German army. But my mother's story is what I found interesting and had a large impact on my life later on, because of the way I heard that story. What it was is that when Germany lost the war, the Russians took over a lot of the land, and East Prussia, being on the eastern end, of course, was first to be invaded. My mother's family was not political, they were just farmers, but they realized they had to evacuate, and so my grandparents evacuated over the ice on the Baltic Sea. But they did not feel that that was safe enough for the children, and so they sent them on a road. And unfortunately, my mother and her two sisters were captured on that road, and they were all three sent to Siberia to a labor camp. My two aunts, the two sisters, died. My mother survived, which is the only reason I'm here. We eventually moved to Canada. When I was 1 year old, we moved to Canada, and I went to school in Canada until I was 6 years old. Then when we moved to the United States over in the Washington area, my father was trained as an engineer, and he worked cutting lumber in Canada because he couldn't find a proper job. But we did the best we could, and when we moved to the United States, we had better opportunities, and my father got a job with Boeing, building aircraft. So he's an aerospace engineer, very bright guy. And so we made the move. But another thing that influenced me is when I was growing up, I was actually a German citizen during that time. And I had to stand up every morning and say the Pledge of Allegiance. You know, and I'm thinking about this, you know, I was this only 6 or 7 year old kid going, you know, what am I doing here? Why am I pledging allegiance to this flag? I'm a German, you know, but peer pressure and so forth, you know, you can't really stand up and say anything. And I did have a little bit of a hard time in school early on, because this was shortly after the war, and you know, they have teacher conferences and stuff. And by myself, I spoke perfect English, but my parents didn't. They had a strong accent. So whenever they came to school to see what was going on, they'd speak in their German accent. And of course, suddenly I was a bad guy. Suddenly everybody knew that I was German. And so I heard a lot of anti-German things during our classes, but the Pledge of Allegiance kind of bugged me. And as a young adult, I always had some suspicions as to why authority is the way it is. I had another big incident as a teenager. We moved around the country a few times, and we ended up in Wellesley, Massachusetts, which, as you may know, has been considered one of the 10 safest places in the country to live. It's a wealthy community. It's very nice. But I had an incident there one time. I was driving a motorcycle through the town square, and I admit I have some share in the fault of this incident, but there was a real pretty girl on the side of the road. I glanced over. When I looked back, there was a dump truck in my lane. facing me. And that dump truck had crossed the double yellow line. The truck belonged to the town of Wellesley. It was a town employee who had done that. He was completely blocking my lane, and I was about to crash into it. So my reaction was to make a hard right turn to try to get over into the park. I went as hard as I could, but the bike leaned so far that the tires came off the ground, and the bike slid between the front wheels of the truck, and I managed to survive by landing in the park. Well, when the police came, the first thing they did is say, I have to go to the hospital. Well, I wasn't that badly injured. I was torn up a little bit, but I was still standing. I was still okay. And I said, well, I think it's important that we get some witnesses for this, because it's clear that I wasn't at fault because the truck crossed over the double yellow line into my lane. However, the police insisted that I be taken to the hospital, so I was. And when I got to the hospital, I called a friend, and they came and got me, so I never even saw a doctor. But first thing I did is go back to the police department to ask them if they had collected any names of witnesses. And they said no. Now, there were skid marks on the road showing that the truck was in my lane. And I pointed that out to the police, and they said, well, we wouldn't know whether those skid marks came from that truck, so that's not part of our police report. And, so I'm thinking, well, this is the police protecting their own. It's a town employee, they're buddies. So I have to take matters into my own hands. So I went around asking if there were any witnesses in that area. And I was lucky to see that the A&P supermarket was right there. And one of the people who saw the accident from the rear was the head of the meat department. He was calling himself the meathead. But he was a very good guy. And he said he would be glad to sign a piece of paper and come to court for me to prove that those skid marks came from that truck. Okay, so that was great. Then and I found somebody who had watched the accident from the other side, and that was a guy, Nick, from Nick's Pizza House. And he said he saw the whole thing from the front, which was my side. And definitely, the truck was totally in my lane, and I had no place to go. So with that information, I went to, I had pictures of the skid marks and so forth. I went to the town public works to find out who their insurance company was. I found that out. I went to the insurance company. They said, after they looked it over, they said, well, you need to see an adjuster. And so they took me right over to an adjuster. The adjuster looked over what I had presented to him. And I told him, this is going to court, but I'm giving you a chance to settle it now because I have so much evidence that it'll be a waste of your money and a lot of time if we do go to court. Well, they didn't even hesitate for 3 minutes and said, okay, fine, how much do you want? And they gave me a good settlement right then and there. I didn't make money. I didn't make any money, but I got my motorcycle paid for and my clothes and helmet paid for. So that was an illustration to me about how the government, how employees, the police in this case, defend each other, and a private individual doesn't get any justice. So I knew that already, but here was an illustration driven home to me. Okay, quite a bit later, I have become interested in politics here in my hometown, my new hometown here in Belmont, New Hampshire. I moved here because it's a free state. It is much freer. We have no income tax. There are quite a few great advantages. A lot of people have moved here now that are freedom-minded. But I live in an area that is not so close to the center of activism. That is mostly down in the southern edge, Manchester and Keene. So I got involved in town politics. And I considered myself a libertarian. I even ran for the legislature as a libertarian. But I ran for for offices in politics here in Belmont as well. And one of the offices I got was I got to be on the Zoning Board of Appeals, which I thought was just unbelievable. How could a libertarian get on the Zoning Board of Appeals? I believe in small government. I don't believe in controlling the people, and I believe in personal property rights. And if you have a property, you should be the one to decide what happens with it, not the government. And so being on the Zoning Board of Appeals actually was kind of a good thing for me, because that is the only access to getting an exception from the law that you have as a property owner. And so I served on that for about a year, and we had 29 cases that came before us, and we approved 27 of them. The following year, we had a lawyer join the board, and he got up and made a speech to say that we had a terrible record, and that our record of granting 27 exceptions to the law was really not right, because the law is there to be universally applied to everyone. And I got up and made a speech and said, yeah, we do have a terrible record. It should have been 29 approvals, not 27 approvals. And I was really lucky to have a few people in that board that would agree with me. I made a lot of noise. I always sat next to the chairman of the board, and he always agreed with me. And so he never overruled anything that I had to say. He allowed me to speak. And then from then on, the lawyer had his say as well, you know, because he always opposed me. But we generally continued that same kind of effect, and I'm very proud of that. A little bit after that, I was interested in having silver and gold as a backup for what I saw as a deterioration of the money. And at one point, I saw that there was an alternative out there in terms of what we call the Liberty Dollar. This guy, Bernard von Nothaus, had designed a currency based on pure silver. And he was introducing that all over the place. And I tried to buy some. I had a hard time buying it locally. I got hold of the national people, and I became an associate. And that's just gives you a little discount on it. Instead of paying $10 for a $10 coin, you pay $9.50 or something like that. And so I did that, and then I realized I could get a little deeper into it if I wanted. There was an opportunity to become what they call an RCO. An RCO is the Regional Currency Office, which allows you a bigger discount, and then you sell to everybody in your territory. And the New Hampshire territory was becoming open. The previous RCO had retired. He couldn't keep up with the dues. They cost $1,000 a year. The previous RCO was an interesting character in and of himself. He's the former deputy sheriff in Hillsborough, an elderly guy, but he is a reformed cop, and he was apologetic about his work as a professional cop. He, in fact, became one of the sovereign citizens and had his house taken off the tax rolls. He was really quite the guy, but he didn't want to continue with being the RCO, so I took it over, and I had a good success rate with that. I think it was primarily an educational tool to educate the people to the fact that their purchasing power had diminished by so much. You know, I think I've seen it on your show where you say that the 1913 dollar now has 3% of its purchasing power left. 97% of the purchasing power disappeared. Now, if you had been in silver that whole time, an ounce of silver back then still buys the same thing as an ounce of silver today. The big comparison really is gold. And they say an ounce of gold back in the olden days would buy you a really good suit of clothes, everything, a first class suit of clothes. Well, that's still true today. An ounce of gold will still buy you a first class suit of clothes. So that kind of thing appealed to me. You know, if you're going to put money away or try to save anything, you don't want to save dollars. You want to save gold and silver. So I was excited to be a part of that. Of course, the government didn't like it too much, and the government started cracking down bit by bit. In about 2006 or so, I joined the outfit in 2005, and about a year later, in 2006, the Mint issued a warning to say that the Liberty Dollar was not legitimate and so forth. The Liberty Dollar organization more or less ignored that and continued on. However, in 2007, the federal government, via the Secret Service and the FBI, raided corporate headquarters and took all the silver and gold. One of the aspects of the Liberty Dollar was paper and electronic dollars. We had ELD, called Electronic Liberty Dollars, and we also had paper certificates. All the paper certificates and the electronic Liberty Dollars were backed by the silver. So if you had a silver certificate for $10, that was fully backed by the silver and gold. However, after the raid, it was backed by nothing. And a lot of people had their full life savings put in that, and they lost it all. And a couple of the RCOs, which were the more serious people involved, were among that group. And so they lost it all. I lost a couple thousand, but that's really, was not anything compared to what some of the other people lost. Now, nobody got arrested during that raid. And all they did is confiscate everything, which is, as you know, is a typical process in this country now, where you just take somebody's belongings and you don't charge them with anything. Well, that's what happened in 2007. Millions of dollars were stolen, but no charges were filed. Nobody was accused of anything. In 2007, the following year, it's 2007, I guess, Bernard was arrested. Now, 4 people were arrested. Bernard was one, 2 girls in the office, and one of the RCOs. One of the RCOs was brought into the confidence of an FBI agent or a Secret Service agent, and he managed to get an invitation to a Liberty Dollar university. Now, we had an annual meeting where all RCOs were invited, and all new RCOs were required to attend because it was educational. And so an FBI agent got himself invited to that, and that's how they infiltrated it from the inside. Of course, there were pretty much no secrets. Everything was open. How the Liberty Dollar was constructed, who made what kind of money, was all open on the internet, and anybody who wanted to join could join under those conditions. So I don't know what they learned by coming to the Liberty Dollar University. That was just all clarification of information that was already available. Okay, so unfortunately, Kevin suffered as one of the worst victims of that because he was actually a Canadian citizen. You may identify with that. And instead of letting him run around, they decided that he was a flight risk and they put him in jail. Bernard was out on bail immediately. The 2 girls in the office were out on bail immediately. But Kevin was put in jail, and he was kept in jail for 2 years. No charges, other than being an illegal immigrant, I guess. He was never charged with that, but that was, I guess, the reason they were keeping him. He spent 2 years in jail. They tried to turn him into state's evidence, as well as the girls from the office, and nobody would do that. But Bernard went to trial. Bernard was convicted of counterfeiting and 2 other things. I don't remember what they were, but like mail fraud and stuff like that. They try to add up all the charges they possibly can. Unfortunately, for Bernard, he has that cloud over his head now. He was convicted, but they did not sentence him. And I understand that the world's record for the sentencing is something around 2 years or 2.5 years. But Bernard now holds the new world's record because it's been 3.5 years since he was sentenced, but he's still free. So he's still running around, but he can't leave the country. You know, he is somewhat restricted in his activities. He did give up the Liberty Dollar entirely. He can't promote it, sell it, do anything with it. So the Liberty Dollar itself is now gone, but for those people who have not seen one or know what it looks like, it's a 1 ounce piece of silver. This is the flagship model of the Liberty Dollar. I'll flip it around. Okay, that's the back side. It was developed a little more so that they later developed 1/2 ounce pieces. So this is a 1/2 ounce piece. This one's been in my pocket for a while, so it's kind of tarnished a little bit. But the first ones were just 1 ounce pieces. Later they made 1/2 ounce, 1/4 ounce, 1/10 ounce, 20th ounce. They made them out of gold. One of the big features big problems that happened is at one time there were custom Liberty Dollars made in order to promote certain political things. In the primary one was the advancement of Ron Paul's presidential campaign, and so they made Ron Paul dollars. Boy, I think that really pissed off a few government officials because it was right after that we had the raid. So there are 1/2 ounce Ron Paul dollars that now go for like $700 because they did become collectible. All Liberty Dollars are now extremely collectible. That 1 ounce piece there that I just showed you, I think that's a 20. No, it's a 10. Okay, that's the early one. The earliest ones were $10, but as you know, silver went up quite a bit. It went to over $20, almost to $40, or over $40 at one point. And so the Liberty Dollar did adjust to those things, and there was a formula that was in place right from the get-go that anyone could see. The fact that when the silver price goes over $10, that the Liberty Dollar will convert to $20 1 ounce pieces, and when the silver price goes over $20, then the Liberty Dollars will become $50 pieces. So this is what kept the program alive, because otherwise, with the increases in value of silver, you wouldn't be able to continue producing them. So that's kind of like a rough history of the Liberty Dollar. One of the things that I discovered around that time is I got a call from a guy who wanted a couple $1,000s worth when I first started. And and of course, I was interested in doing that. And so I met this guy in Manchester at a bar, and the guy's name is Dave Ridley, and he's an activist in the area, and I didn't know that at the time, but it was a funny story when I first met him. The bar I met him at happens to be the home meeting place of the Free State Project. I just want to correct you a little bit on the introduction. I'm a pioneer member of the Free State Project, which means that I lived in New Hampshire before the Free State Project became an organization. And so I'm not an early mover or a late mover or any kind of a mover. I lived here before that. And so I do support their project, and very much so. And so that's why I get the designation as a pioneer member. However, when I met Dave Ridley, this is a little bit of a funny story. We sat at a table, and I started bringing out my silver, and he started bringing out his cash onto the table. And he saw me looking around, because we got a lot of valuables here on the table in a bar. And he said, "Don't worry," he says, "no, I'm armed." And my reply to that was, "I am not worried. I'm just looking around to see what's going on. I'm armed also." So I mean, that's the way we are here in New Hampshire. The Free State Project, if you've ever been to one of our meetings, you'll see that about a third of the people run around with a sidearm in the open. That's totally legal in New Hampshire. Any kind of a weapon is legal if you're of age. Over 21, you can carry a rifle. Over 21, you can carry a pistol. Over 18, you can carry a rifle. Now, I don't necessarily subscribe to the open carry concept in general. It's a good idea for making a point, but it is controversial even among the Free State Project people. I personally prefer to carry concealed, and so does, well, Dave is an activist, has done both. He carries concealed, but he carries open, and I highly recommend his website, ridleyreport.com. He does video reporting on all kinds of events for the Free State Project. He has a very good website, describes a lot of incidents that happen. That was my introduction, actually, to the Free State Project, because he invited me to stay for the meeting, and I certainly did. And I found out that those people are all like-minded, and it became a great market for my Liberty dollars. So that was a super introduction. I later became involved in some of their big events. You may know of PorcFest. I know you were at PorcFest at least once. Most of the biggest activists in the world that are involved in the Liberty movement have been to PorcFest, and I highly recommend it. It's held in Lancaster, New Hampshire these days, up in the northern part of the state. It's quite a drive even for us here in New Hampshire. It's an hour and a half, 2 hours for me to drive. I'm in the middle of the state. Most of the population is in the southern part of the state, so they have to drive even further. But PorcFest is a campground, and it involves a little bit of roughing, so it's not for everybody, but it's a good time. And the other big event they have is Liberty Forum, which is in a hotel, Crown Plaza down in Manchester, and that's more civilized. That's all indoors, and they bring in big speakers. And at one of those, I met Ron Paul personally. When he was leaving, I managed to shake his hand and stick a Liberty dollar in his hand, which he appreciated, went right into his pocket. And I told him to use it any way he wants. He doesn't have to use it for the campaign, but probably that's where it went. Then the other thing about the Liberty dollar, the Free State Project, that is very interesting that most people don't know about is that they are focused not only on bringing people of like mind to live in New Hampshire. They have picked out a town where they want to focus the people in New Hampshire, and that's Grantham, New Hampshire. In Grantham, they have a concentration of people. And the other interesting thing, I was in real estate for a little while. What's very interesting about Grantham is they have no zoning. Now, even in New Hampshire, we don't have total freedom. We have zoning in almost every town. And I think there are only 5 or 6 towns left where they have no zoning. And those are mostly way up north near the Canadian border where there's nothing but trees and bears. And to have a town like Grantham be free of zoning is unbelievable. They are in more or less the southern end near a big lake called Sunapee. There's a big ski area there, a beautiful lake. There's a lot of nice features. It's wonderful country. And I'm thinking of going, I wish I had known about that to begin with. It's really hard for me to move now, but if I was just starting out, I would live in Grantham. And I've seen videos of their town meetings where Free State Project people get up and speak, and they don't dominate, but they are very influential there. And I think that's just a wonderful project to get involved with. Yeah, so anyway, I was a libertarian for a while, and I'm still wrestling with the distinction between a libertarian and a anarchist. And I've decided that probably I'm an anarchist now because in my mind, the distinction is that a libertarian wants to work within the system and bring about change that way. And they have the same philosophy, basically, but not quite as extreme. You know, the libertarians would like as small a government as possible. The best government is that which is the least governing. And that's, I think that's probably somewhat realistic, but really, I think this country has evolved now to the point where the democracy is not working anymore. One of the sayings that the libertarians like to say is democracy is 3 wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for lunch. Okay, and now that 51% of the US population is dependent on the government, what do you think they're going to vote for? Of course, they're going to vote for more government, or at least keep the government so they can keep the gravy train going. But anyway, so that's the reason I think I've crossed the line now. Now I've more or less stepped out of government entirely, and I'm not voting anymore. I think there's probably no point. In fact, maybe the opposite might be a good idea, to participate in such a way to bring the collapse about so we can start over. I'm not quite to that point, but I do think that every aspect of government is now corrupt, and it's time to bag it all and start over. And I think that's consistent with the anarchist point of view.
Yeah, you brought up a lot of great points. One thing I'd like to point out is that I see libertarians as being anarchists. I think if you look at the meaning of the word libertarian, it means that you hold as your most valued principle liberty. And of course, if your most valued principle is liberty, then the most free you could possibly be is without a government whatsoever. So a true libertarian is an anarchist, in my opinion. Now, in the U.S., they have the Libertarian Party, so that's where the big L and the little L comes in. So what a lot of people say is big L libertarian. That is what you described, which is very minimal government, which actually I don't have much problems with at all. And if we had a world like that, I'd be so much happier, and I probably wouldn't even worry too much about getting at the final step. But the little L, libertarian, the true meaning of that actually is anarchist, which just means you don't want people to violently rule over you, and you don't want to rule others. And you brought up a lot of great points. One of them was about, actually I should bring up about voting. I actually used to say don't vote, but I'm sort of changing on that now because there's so many anarchists running for political office at this moment in time. In Canada, the Libertarian Party leader of Canada, Tim Moen, who I call the Ron Paul of Canada, he's actually going to be here speaking on the beach at Anarchapulco this coming February 27 to March 1st. He's an anarchist. He's been on Anarchast before. We've had numerous people running for Congress who are anarchists. We just had Alex Fidel, who's running for the mayor of Encinitas. He's an anarchist, and it looks like he's got a decent chance to win that one, so that's interesting. So it'd be quite interesting to have a lot of anarchists in government. It definitely
Absolutely.
would. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, I'm saying that I'm an anarchist with that slight reservation that I'd also still support the libertarian ideal. Now, one of the things that's happened here in New Hampshire is with this Free State Project. These people are serious, and we have a lot of different types of people, and we have people that can speak really well, and we've got a couple of them that would like to run for office, but they're also very practical. And so I ran as a libertarian. Now, that was a mistake. I didn't realize at the time. And these people are learning from previous experiences, including my own, and they're saying, okay, well, we can't win as a libertarian? No problem, I'll run as a Democrat. What wins around here? Tell me what wins. Oh, it's Republicans? Fine. I'm a Republican.
It's sort of funny because the whole history of politics has been mostly politicians lying to get into office. So why not tell a small lie and just say, oh, sure, I'll run under Democrat, but you're still an anarchist. I'm kind of hoping that's what happens with Rand Paul. I hope he's lying about all the things he's saying just so he can get in, and then he'll start tearing down the government from the inside before he gets assassinated, of course. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. There's definitely a movement going on. There's definitely definitely a revolution or an evolution going on, and it's interesting to see it all playing out in many different ways.
Well, that's right. And you know that the political designations of Democrat and Republican really are pretty meaningless. They have a very wide spectrum of beliefs, both of them, and they overlap. And in fact, they might range all the way from communist to dictatorship, as far as what they're actually thinking. And I don't think it's really dishonest or even much of a lie to run as whatever the hell will win. And I know, and you know, and so do the people who vote for them know what they're thinking, you know, and so, I guess a few people don't, which is maybe why the reason is that they have to do that. But right. They've won. That's the beauty of it. There's about 5 or 6 of them now, Free State Project people that have gotten a seat in the Congress in the state Congress in New Hampshire. And that's excellent. That's excellent. Now, that's a more libertarian than it is an anarchist point of view, but I'm okay with it.
Yeah, it's a lot better. And yeah, you're right. It isn't really lying to run under Republican or Democrat, because neither of those parties have any real principles. They flip-flop on everything all the time. So who's to say that your ideas don't fit within their party, especially the Republican Party, which used to be fairly close to being libertarian decades ago, but over the decades it's just gotten worse and worse. It's essentially the fascist party versus the communist party now is really what it is. And it doesn't matter even who gets in, it still turns out pretty much exactly the same. It just a few small things change. Maybe there's a little bit more gay marriage, or maybe there's a little bit more gun rights, or essentially it's just sort of choosing which countries you want the military-industrial complex to bomb is all you're really choosing between the two parties. And of course the president doesn't make any decisions. Barack Obama just reads off a teleprompter. So yeah, you're right. I don't think it's lying or being disingenuous to run for those parties. If that's what gets you in, because as we just pointed out, there is no real principles behind any of them. And once we have enough people in those things, and this is interesting because like I said, a couple years ago, I said I would never vote. But now I've changed that. I will vote in 2 cases. If there's ever, in an area where I live, if there's ever a referendum to make things more free, for example, legalize marijuana or things along those lines, yes or no, I will vote in that situation, because I think that helps the situation. We've seen that happen in Colorado. Past Anarchast guest Joby Weeks actually started the entire global revolution in legalizing and decriminalizing marijuana, all from just starting a petition in Colorado a few years ago. And we've seen how that's just bloomed. So we're seeing all kinds of people get things going through the actual electoral system, through the democracy, as they call it. And then, of course, we have people that are running for these offices, and they're anarchists and all that. So the second situation I would vote is if the person is a very, very avowed big L libertarian who's very, very, very small government. I would vote for that. And if they're an anarchist and they say they're an anarchist, I'll definitely vote for them. So those are the 2 instances now where I would vote. But hopefully we just get past all these stupid systems and get more governments too. I think that's the real way that we get things going. We're seeing secessionist movements happening all over the world right now. Of course, the Scottish one just failed, but just by a little bit, and they're still trying. The Spanish one just got, the Basque region, Catalonia, I believe it's called, actually put off their referendum for secession. So that's interesting. I'm not sure what happened there, but all over the place. Venice, Italy voted to leave Italy. You're seeing states in the U.S. talking about wanting to secede. And of course, I always say, if at first you don't secede, try again. And I think the more that we can have more governments, which is really backwards sort of thinking for an anarchist, is that you want more governments, but that's actually what we want. We want more and more governments, which means smaller and smaller governments until we reach 7 billion governments on Earth and every single person owns themselves, and then we'll have peace and prosperity like we've never known it.
Yes, I agree. I don't know why people would vote against secessionism. It seems to me that once they secede, now they're in a position where they can voluntarily cooperate with the government that they just seceded from. Now that just gives them more freedom. They still have all the advantages, and they can still trade. They can still visit, they can still do everything that they ever did before, but now it's all voluntary. Hello, what's wrong with that picture?
Yeah, it's all brainwashing. I just saw there's going to be a referendum in some state in this coming election in November where people are going to have a chance to vote if they want this particular sales tax or not. I can't believe anyone would vote to want more taxes. It's brainwashing. People still think that they're a part of the government. The government is them. And so they're thinking, oh, yes, I want more money. That'll pay more of my bills. No, it doesn't. It just takes more money from more people and destroys it and ruins the economy, and it's terrible.
Well, that particular issue comes up here in New Hampshire every couple of years. You know, we have no income tax, which we're famous for. We have no sales tax. We're not quite as famous for that, but it's a fact. And a lot of people come from the neighboring states to buy stuff here. But you know what you don't hear about at all is that we have a tremendous high property tax. And the property tax is extreme. It's high as it is in Massachusetts, which has got to be one of the highest tax jurisdictions in the world. They don't call it Taxachusetts for nothing. And here we have in New Hampshire, we have equally high property taxes, but that's why they're so high, is they're compensating for all the taxes that they don't have. And so that is a big argument for why they want to bring in sales taxes. It's introduced every so often. They try to bring in the sales tax or an income tax, whatever other tax, to try to relieve the property tax. Now, that's the excuse they come in with. But of course, you know, you can't believe that, because what they're really going to do is leave the property tax just as high as it was, and then they have another tax that they get to waste on other things, maybe war, who knows what, but probably something wasteful. And that's, you know, that's our point as libertarians and anarchists, that the government, whenever it gets the power or the money or the will to do something, it's always wrong.
Yeah, and when in that case, people are just voting to say, they think. So for example, in New Hampshire, if they're paying a really large property tax, which is terrible, that essentially means they're renting their house from the government. They don't even own it. So a lot of people will say, oh, let's vote for the sales tax. Maybe the property taxes will go down because of that. And maybe they will a little bit for a little while. But that's all voting is really just a group trying to decide which group to steal the most from. It's just terrible, and it's just amazing that people still believe in the system. But of course, this system offers a lot of things for free to people. They're not free, they're actually stolen from other people, but people don't really see that, or even if they do see it, they're happy about it. And of course, many people like to get things for free, and that's really why government today still exists in many places, is because they've managed to convince enough people that they're getting something for nothing, or getting more than they would without the government. And that's absolutely not the case. Without government theft, taxation, regulation, central bank inflation, the world would be so much more prosperous and so much better for everybody involved. There might be a few people who do worse at the very beginning, but very quickly there'd be so much prosperity that everything would be so much better. And of course, if we got rid of the whole government system, which is all based on violence and theft, that really influences societies. When you live in a system that is based on violence and theft, you're going to have a very violent and thieving society. And that's what we see in places like the US more and more, is that lot of problems, a lot of societal problems, and they're all caused by the government. I don't like to keep these too long. Everyone's got ADD nowadays, and I think you have to run off to a Free State board meeting. So why don't you just let us know any final comments, and let us know a little bit more about the Free State and where people can find out about that.
Sure. The Free State Project is kind of a loose organization, and they've recently made a lot of progress. They have recently decided to hire a full-time president. Now, she's kind of apologetic about being the president because she doesn't want to be a boss to anybody, but it has made a lot of strides since then. And they've had a couple of major news incidents with the Robin Hooding and other things. Carla Gerke is the new president. She personally had an incident where she recorded the police, and she was arrested, and they arrested the wrong person there, boy. She's just a innocent-looking girl, but she's a lawyer, and she's not stupid, and she took him to court, and she won. And so now that's new case law here in New Hampshire, the Gerke versus town of Weir. And she won $57,000 from them. And so they're going to be a little more cautious next time they stop somebody from videotaping. But if you look it up online, it's I got it written down here. Free State Project, all run together, .org is the where you can find more information on the Free State Project. There are a lot of links to other things. The younger people that are moving to the state tend to go down to the Keene area. There is a Keene State College, and I think those people tend to be a little bit younger. And that's where the Robin Hooding escapade started. And I admire those people. They got some balls, and I appreciate that. They are loosely connected with the Free State Project. And so if you click on the Free State Project, you'll see links on both sides with videos from Ridley Report and a whole bunch of other things. Free Talk Live with Ian Freeman, whom we've had on. He's a very articulate guy. It's a super education, and it gives you some insight into what goes on here in New Hampshire. And perhaps you'd like to move here. We'd like to have you.
Yeah, definitely give it some consideration if you live in the U.S. or even if you don't live in the U.S. and you, for whatever reason, want to live in the U.S. Definitely that would be one area that I'd check out for sure. And I'd like to actually apologize to Carla Garicki. I actually interviewed her at PorcFest on the last PorcFest in July, but my camera hard drive failed, so I didn't get that interview up. So I'm going to try to get her on sometime soon, hopefully. I'd like to do it live, though, so that's why I'm waiting for another conference where I see her. But she's been doing a great job up there in the Free State Project. So definitely check that out. Check out anarchapulco.com. We're going to have links down below. Charles Hampe is going to be at Anarchapulco, and a lot of other people will be as well that you've heard of. It's sort of interesting that people like Bernard von Nothaus of Liberty Dollar, he can't, we invited him to come, but he can't come because he's sort of still under arrest, but not put in jail, or convicted, but not put in jail. People like people like Adam Kokesh, he has to ask permission from a judge because he's under probation for loading a shotgun in Washington, D.C. and putting it on YouTube. So it's sort of funny that we're outside of the U.S. here in Mexico, and so many Americans in the land of the free can't even come here without permission, or they're not even allowed to come here because of the police state that's really grown up in the U.S. So that's what we're trying to wake people up to and try to show people more options. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out Anarchapulco. It's going to be one of a kind, amazing event, and you're not going to want to miss it if you're a freedom lover. So that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
This is Anarchast.